Welcome to Risky Bitness, where we don't just talk about the retro games, but we also look into the hardware they run on, open up the hood, and see what all that beautiful technology can do. This is part 2 of our Famicom Disk System series, where we're going to talk about the most fascinating footnote in gaming history to come out of 1986's Famicom Disk System. The system itself, a massive failure, but this game, a huge success, and one of the coolest stories in retro gaming history. Let's get into it. So in 1986, Super Mario Bros. 2 was released on the Famicom Disk System. But this is not the game that you and I grew up with. Instead, it kind of felt like an expansion of the original Super Mario Bros. It's got all the same assets, but with all new levels. And there's no two-player mode, but you can choose Mario or Luigi. Luigi controls a little differently. He jumps much higher and farther, but has very poor traction while on the ground. It feels kind of like you're always walking on ice with Luigi. And that carried over into the game we know as Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, Miyamoto's goal with Super Mario Bros. 2 was to make a more challenging game. By this time, players in Japan were mastering Super Mario Bros. It was a huge phenomenon. It was wildly popular, and people were playing it a lot. They were ready for a much harder game, or a much harder version of the same game. After all, if it's broke, don't fix it. They love the characters, the levels, the settings, the graphics, the music. They just wanted more challenge, and that's what Miyamoto was out to give. Now, I don't know how much of this is history and how much is legend, but apparently, Nintendo chairman Howard Lincoln, when he first received this game, because he used to playtest basically every game that came over from Japan, he was killed by a poison mushroom, and you'll see in the footage here the poison mushroom in the very beginning of the game. It's a power down. It kills you or shrinks you, but it looks like a one-up mushroom. And if you're not careful, you can very easily get the poison mushroom by accident. And after that, Howard Lincoln said it was way too brutal and punishing for the American market. We are not pro gamers here. We don't take this as seriously as the Japanese do. And it just feels like more of the same game, but harder. It's not going to catch on in the US with our audiences. Poison mushrooms, a backward warp zone that takes you back to the beginning of the game. Just brutal, punishing game. Still 4 levels per world. Still an overworld, underground, sky, and castle level. Only innovation is that you can save your progress. And I talked a lot about in the last video what a big deal being able to save your progress in video games was, especially couch consoles that didn't have that ability before. Even though you could save your progress, though, unless you were a real pro Super Mario Bros., you weren't getting very far. Now, what Nintendo of America wanted to do is they wanted to follow up with something that would really satisfy the American audience. Now, we did eventually see this game that I've been talking about, the Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, if you grew up in the 90s, you already know this game, and you've probably played it quite a bit, and that is Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, which was released as part of the Super Mario All-Stars package, which was a pack-in game for a promotional re-release of the Super NES. That happened, I want to say, about 1993. Yeah, 1993. And I just remember that was the big pack-in game when they reduced the price of the system from $199 to $99.99, and they packed it in with Super Mario All-Stars. In that game, it was rebranded as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. And of course, these were all remastered versions of old Super Mario Bros. Games that were on this cartridge. So you had Super Mario Bros. 1, you had The Lost Levels, the game that we call Super Mario Bros. 2, and Super Mario 3 in 16-bit with improved graphics and sound. And this version of The Lost Levels looks really, really great. It definitely was tuned to not be quite as difficult. And the poison mushrooms now, instead of looking like a slightly different colored one-up mushroom, is easily distinguished from the original design, so it won't be killing you immediately in this game. Something that definitely made a huge impact on the playability of the game. So we're talking even now, 6 years later, still saying, you know what? this game's still a little too brutal. We'll release it as a special bonus pack-in, but let's tune it to make it a little bit easier for the Americans. Now, the game that was released in the US in 1987 as Super Mario Bros. 2 was basically a reskin of Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic. This is a cool story. So Doki Doki was released on the FDS in 1987, and it was a promotional tool for Fuji Television. Fuji was having the Yume Kojo Technology Expo, and they wanted a tie-in game to promote the event. Yume Kojo in Japanese means Dream Factory. So this was the Dream Factory Expo from Fuji Television. And they had some cross-promotion with Nintendo. R&D4, Nintendo's R&D4 made the tie-in game. And this is also the same team that made the Lost Levels. So we had the same team, Mario game makers, working on the game for the Dream Factory. And the characters in the game fit the Arabian theme of the expo. So whereas we had Mario, Luigi, Princess, and Toad, they had simply brother, sister, mama, and papa. And they were used for the advertising for the event. The title of the game, Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic, Dream Factory, heart-pounding panic, they say. I don't know if I agree with heart-pounding as being the right translation for that. I'm not an expert in Japanese, but it's an onomatopoeia. Doki Doki is a heartbeat. Doki Doki, Doki Doki. So heart-pounding, I don't know about heart-pounding, but I get the idea of what they're trying to convey. It's an exciting game. It's the exciting Dream Factory game. It's a heart-pounding panic. It's a Doki Doki panic. It's going to get your heart rate going. And the story was pretty similar to what the Mario story became, which was the family's two youngest children got sucked into a storybook, and the rest of the family jumped into the storybook to come after them. And I believe in the US version that it's a very similar story where Mario jumped into a storybook. So Doki Doki's a little bit different though, because it required that you had to select one of the 4 characters at the beginning of the game, and your goal was to complete the entire game with that character. Then to unlock the good ending, you had to finish the game with all 4. So you couldn't change characters in between levels. You had to stick with the same character and try to clear with all of them. And of course you'd be saving your progress along the way, so maybe you would finish with Papa, then you would try Mama, then Brother, then eventually Sister, and then you would have all the levels cleared. Now Nintendo America chose Doki Doki as the game that would become Super Mario 2, as suggested by R&D4 Miyamoto, because it had a very similar feel to Super Mario Bros. If you played this in 1987, you probably felt like it worked, like it made sense as a Mario game. They added the vertical scrolling levels, which is a little bit different, and pulling items out of the ground to throw them at enemies was something a little bit different. But it still felt a lot like a Mario game. There were even some Mario assets in there, like bombs and the POW blocks. So it wasn't totally, completely out of the world for this to become Mario game when it was brought over to the US. The 4 characters, of course, were replaced with Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach, and Toad, and they took on the characteristics of the Doki Doki character they replaced. So it was really a one-to-one thing. Papa became Toad, Mama became the princess, sister became Luigi, and brother became Mario. And they still had all the same characteristics, the floating, the big jumps, all copied from the Doki Doki characters. And there were a few enhancements as well. The character select screen and the bonus game screens, for example, much nicer, look much prettier in this game. They added some graphical fidelity there, probably because the cartridge allowed them to do so. A run button was actually added. So you know how in Mario games you can hold down the B button to run? In Doki Doki Panic you couldn't do that. So if you wanted to run across that big gap in level 1 and take the shortcut to the first boss, you couldn't do that in Doki Doki Panic as anybody except for Sister, who could float over. You had to do that only with that one character. The rest had to go the long way. So getting over gaps like that became a new thing that you could do in the US version. You also could collect a mushroom instead of a heart, and the first mushroom you collect in each level would cause you to become super and grow large. You still had that life bar, but the first time you got hit, you would shrink back to your small size. In Doki Doki, there's no growing and shrinking. And you could select a new character after each level, so you didn't have to finish the whole game with the same character. You could switch between levels, and you would still finish the game and get the good ending. Of course, you had to do it all in one go. There was no saving your game. So all these changes were clearly made to make the game make a little bit more sense in the cartridge format, and I think also, of course, to appeal more to the US audience. But it was a massive success. It sold over 7 million units in the US, which at the time was very, very impressive. And they even re-released this in Japan as Super Mario USA, which I think is, quite frankly, I think that takes balls. They're going to take a game that was already released, was re-released elsewhere with a new skin and sold as a different product, re-released it domestically with the new skin as a different product. Just ballsy on the part of Nintendo of Japan, I gotta say. And people still bought it. Amazing. So the Famicom disk system, while ultimately unsuccessful, remains just a really interesting footnote in gaming history. And I don't think we saw this kind of expansion to a game system again until Sega rolled out the Sega CD and the 32X. I'll be covering those in a future episode a little bit more. And I don't even think like the PC Engine CD came out even at that point yet. I think this was all totally a new thing. So thank you so much for watching. As I said before, I know there are just a ton of retro gaming channels, and there's so many really great ones that I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I intend on really trying to bring this channel to the next level and improve things. I want to get my hands on some original hardware so I could take it apart, make videos of that, show pictures, and review a lot of different kinds of older games and hardware. And I really want to do a lot more tech breakdowns as well. So if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, turn on notifications, leave a comment, and I'm going to be releasing a lot more gaming tech intro videos in the future, so stay tuned to see what's next. Thank you again for watching. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever and whenever it is you are in the world, and I'll see you next time.